Electricity is an essential service, and modern society has a critical dependency on this, as we have all felt in our bones. The failure of this essential service cascade with great social consequence. For instance, water does not flow to your tap. It gets pumped there. You know about water resilience and its implications. Imagine, anyway. So, furthermore, electricity is a foundational essential service, because all the other layers of essential services needs it to power it. So Wi-Fi has become, for young people, their most basic need. You won't have that if you don't have power. So there's underlying layers of foundation that needs to be strong and needs to be in place for this to work. And societal resilience are tightly intertwined with the resilience of essential services. I don't need to tell you about the issues with Eskom. It is broken for so many different reasons, but load shedding has shown us the social consequence of having disruption. We are center stage in this whole state capture and corruption inside the system, conversations and challenges. The people who keep the lights on have shown us that they have the power to switch the light off. Last year, when they were told, okay, sorry guys, we don't have money, 0% increases. So they said, then it's 0 megawatts of power. And it did result in sabotage on our plant that has very detrimentally impacted the reliability of our systems. Greenpeace is saying, your power is dirty. And they're right. Unfortunately, there are hundreds of people dying because of the pollution in the Mpumalanga area. Furthermore, we have customers who have never paid for their power, those that are helping themselves through illegal connections, those that used to pay. Look at this uncomfortable trend. Municipal payment levels, how that's coming down, municipal debt levels going up, and then those that are paying, the debate, the war around tariffs. But worse than all of this is the size of Eskom's debt, and relative to the fiscus, the risk it poses to the national economy. There are there's a narrative out there that says too big to fail. There's a narrative that says too big to save. How do we change this? Now, I propose that, standing on the shoulders of bigs, that essential services are produced by complex adaptive socio-technical systems, which requires the interplay of technology and social institutions, and in which hard and soft infrastructure are tightly intertwined. One of the foundational rocks on which this work has been established is the recognition that there are two types of problems, your complicated and complex problems. And through complicated approaches, we can bring about order and control. And it is management strategies, engineering design, and its aim is to bring stability and enable prediction with specified levels of confidence. So we have the modelers and the statisticians, forecasters. These complicated approaches and reduction has enabled tremendous technological advances. It has enabled us to put men on the moon, and now we're going to colonize Mars. However, whenever you are looking at technological and complicated solutions, it is always embedded within a wider world that is complex, where the paradigm and the mindset that works in the complicated space fail utterly in the wider complexity of the world. Due to nonlinear effects, regime shifts, full of surprises, and you can expect disruption and change in this context. So this complexity generates intractable problems that cannot be tackled in a reductionist fashion. when we are studying the complexity in the world, we are looking at complex adaptive systems. And yeah, so having said that, the resilience of essential services then is the capacity of complex adaptive socio-technical systems to sustain the production of essential services in the face of disruption and ongoing social, technological, and environmental change. You have to invest in hard and soft infrastructure, and you have to employ both complicated and complex approaches. And this then is the foundation for so many of the rest of the work, where I've established this framework for resilient essential services that distinguishes between these respective dimensions to give you 4 different domains. Firstly, by distinguishing between the nature of the investment. Is it soft? Is it hard? And both are required. They have very different design intents, very different cost implications, periods of return on investment. When you are building a new flyover for navigating traffic, it takes a very long time before you see something, and from there on you can almost forget about it. Whereas how you invest into the social fabric can achieve a result in a much shorter time frame, but you have to keep on doing it. Just the nature of human nature. And if we then look at these 2 different contexts, the complicated and the complex, resilience refer to specified resilience and general resilience, where specified resilience is the capacity of identified components, what needs to be able to withstand what. So these identified components need to be able to withstand identified threats and risks. So I know what I'm dealing with. I know what I need to design for. Whereas we have seen that the types of disruptions and incidents that happen is fundamental surprise. Would never have thought this is possible. Like, our plans didn't cater for this. Because we know that's true, we need something of a much more generic nature. That is general resilience. It's a generic capacity for that complex adaptive system to sustain its continuity while it adapt and transform in the face of any threat, surprise, or unforeseen risks. So let me tell you the historical context for this research. Traditionally, when you refer to grid resilience or infrastructure resilience, which is a very common and growing interest topic around the world, people normally follow engineering approaches and operations controls to have this specified technical resilience. In Eskom, we were confronted with our need for general technical resilience in 2008. You remember what happened? Wet coal. Why was the coal so wet? Doesn't it normally rain in Mpumalanga? It is so fascinating that 2 years before we had a strong La Nina. And what normally happens about 2 years after that meteorological event, there is a subtropical cyclone that comes into the Madagascar Strait. And when that happens, the rain pattern in Mpumalanga and the Waterberg is completely different from the normal. It rains for a week, 2 weeks, up to a month. There was this one that went all the way through into Namibia that rained for a month. Now, 2 weeks of sustained rain. Okay, maybe let me say in the olden days when I started, Eskom was managed by engineers. At this point in time, it was managed by bean counters. They looked at the coal stocks and they said, "Why are you leaving so much money there? Deplete this." So it became hollows. And with that amount of rain, this was slush. And you try and stick your graders into the mud and throw it into the burners. It just could not produce the calorific value to give the energy output that was needed to sustain, because our supply-demand deficit, slow systems variable, had reached a tipping point. So many of you familiar with Unsi's work will recognize the terms that I've mentioned in what happened. Anyway, In 2013, this systems resilience focus, where Robert Koch started as the senior manager of enterprise resilience, was then extended to the whole enterprise. So it went from technical, general technical, to now specified social. And their objective was to establish across the enterprise a standardized best practice approach to embed resilience across the enterprise. And this is where I work. When I went and asked Robert for a job, and eventually he said, okay, you can have a job if you do this thing, which is resilience assessment. So I said, okay, well, I'm not sure what resilience is, and I'm not sure what assessments are, so let me learn, which is why I embarked on this learning journey. And also what I saw is that if this is the people, my colleagues that I rub shoulders with, if this is the people that we have to keep the lights on and to restore the country if we had a national blackout. And what do I see here? Poor, low morale, lack of trust, willing to engage in sabotage. If this is what we have to work with, how do we do this? And it was the significance of that task that made me to pursue a learning and growing opportunity to say, I have to become more, because I don't have what it takes to understand how to make a difference in this space. And this is why I did what I did. So then in 2016, I embarked on this study with the question, what is the implication of complexity? If resilience is an emergent outcome from a complex adaptive system, and this is what we have to work with, how can we do this? How can the wisdom of complexity thinking and resilience thinking assist us in bringing something out of what we have to work with? Furthermore, I focused on assessing social resilience because there's a lot of work already on technical resilience. I saw in the fragility of the organization and in the mood I could pick up that this is people like Alan, people like Robert. We can name the individuals who bring tremendous strength to the system's resilience. But the social element also brings tremendous vulnerability. We have that capacity for both. And it is up to us to be able to arrest the failure when it falls, to be able to arrest that and restore it. This is the fabric we have to work with. Technology fail. Once it's broken, it's broken. You need people to fix it. So the aims of the research was to inform alternative approaches to assess and build social resilience in order to enhance the capacity of the socio-technical system to maintain the continuity of its core functions amidst disruption, and to improve the resilience of electricity supply as an essential service in South Africa. And this aim was achieved through 4 different research articles. Firstly, to develop a conceptual framework for assessing resilience of essential services. Secondly, to pilot 2 different methods for assessing and building social resilience using a principle-based formative resilience assessment approach that operationalized the 7 resilience building principles of BIGS. And there are some brochures in the back there that you can pick up that expands on that as well as on this particular approach. And secondly, using a narrative-based sense-making approach. Now, because people knew I was applying sense-making to my research, I eventually started noticing the number of PhDs contacting me for academic literature about the sense-making method. And it started just in South Africa, and eventually it was global. And because of how little there was, I decided to fill the gap. So I wrote an article on this. I love it. One of my examiners commented that this is the weakest paper out of the lot. And to date, it has been the most, the one with the most interest, the most reads by far, by order of magnitude. You know, it's like the time was right and the gap was there. So I hope to show you in the next few minutes the particular aspects of the scientific contribution from this work. Theoretically, it conceptualized resilience in socio-technical systems, highlight the social dimension of resilience essential services as opposed to the traditional critical infrastructure focus, distinguish that interplay between complex and complicated, they are different, they are both right, they are both required, but they are conflicting. When you look at them, there's an apparent conflict between how you approach them, what it looks like, and when they are required. And then to surface the role of sense-making. Now, between your senses, one of your 5 senses, having sensed something from the environment and you acting, that's where sense-making takes place. And if you, based on how you make sense of what you've sensed, if that determines your action, the quality of that sense-making is critical for a resilient response. Especially in a socio-technical system where you are controlling, you are operating this network. Alan used to be at National Control, now it's at Coburg, equal in terms of implications and complexity. You have to be able to make sense. Let me not go into that. So the methodological contributions focuses on assessing social resilience. So what it shows is the distinction between formative and summative assessments, something common to education, but it was not previously acknowledged or the implications of that spoken about in the resilience community. To operationalize the 7 resilience building principles, take this tremendous theory and show what can we do with this in practice. To describe the SenseMaker method, and then to employ sense-making as a resilient assessment approach. So it's making sense of how people are making sense of their response. And empirical contributions was to produce social resilience assessments of electricity supply in South Africa, and to highlight the implications for building social resilience in Eskom. And I will ask Robert afterwards to speak on that. So, as far as the framework was also the organizing logic for the whole of the thesis. For those of you who are now afterwards going to, I need to read this, here's the crypt notes of how it all fits together. The conceptual chapter describes everything in its totality, the whole framework. Then that's chapter 2. Chapter 3 goes into, we need to build formatively, we need to have a formative assessment, and you will see just now what do I mean by a formative assessment, into this to create, to stimulate this general social resilience. So that's what chapter 3 focuses on, brochure at the back. Chapter 4 describes the SenseMaker method that was then used in chapter 5, which is that resilience assessment that distinguishes between general and specified resilience. Let me just wet my throat. So, chapter 2 makes this conceptual contribution. Was published as the framework chapter in Ecology and Society in 2018. To date, that is the one with the most citations. And its aim was to explore how the resilience of essential services can be enhanced by focusing on a clearly defined system, in our case, the socio-technical system producing 95% of the power for South Africa, that underpin key functions in modern society. So, what I love about this framework is that those 2 aspects of specified versus general resilience provides you, on the one hand, a predictable response in disruption. On the general resilience side, it provides an emergent adaptability in the face of fundamental surprises. I use the well-known organizational diagram of the 3 different levels of leadership to then highlight how operational level leadership has to focus on persistence of the services. That's where you keep the lights on, and you have to be able to persist amidst all of these things that's coming. it is the responsibility of tactical leadership. None of this is exclusive, but this would be the primary focus. Tactical leadership continuously improve. Your focus is on adapt, finding ways for the system to continuously adapt. And especially in an organization, it is the obligation of the strategic leadership to transform the system in the light of the changes of the context, and preferably before transformation is forced on you. So we can choose to transform by disrupting ourselves, or wait until you're forced to transform. But transformation, it has to be, in an organizational context, it has to come from the strategic levels of leadership. What the framework then does is to, like a multi-dimensional pyramid, look at the implications of these respective lenses and suggest indicators of resilience that can be applied in a resilience assessment. And don't have to read it now, but it's actually summarized in the brochure. Now, when you look at a formative and a summative assessment, it will be so familiar to you because a summative assessment in education is the year-end exam or the PhD examination, where it's at a particular, it's scheduled every term, every year, or at the end of your PhD, of the resilience that you have established up to now against indicators that somebody decided from the top. Somebody has got the mark sheets, I don't know what you call it in education, against which you're going to be marked. Okay, and the purpose of that summative assessment is to produce a report that's given to a third party to give an account of what you have accomplished. And it can be used for comparison, aggregation, or benchmarking purposes. So we can compare the resilience of all the different national parks in South Africa and see which ones are more resilient, like benchmark against whatever. Quite often, resilience is employed as a lens within development projects, where at the conclusion of that project term, when the money is spent, they perform a summative assessment to report to the investors the difference that they have made within the community. This is very different from a formative assessment. A formative assessment is this ongoing, interactive, bidirectional process for a resilience outcome. You're doing it because you want to enhance levels of resilience in the process of formatively assessing. To facilitate a bottom-up dialogue among the actors in the system, for them to diagnose where the system is at based on their level of understanding. It doesn't matter who, there's no expert in this. What is it that you say? Where do you think it is? And they then, based on this conversation and this mutual understanding, agree where resilience should be built through collective action towards shared resilience goals. Now, it is common in the resilience assessment literature that resilience assessors claim to want to assess and hope that they're building it in the same simultaneously. Yes, you're welcome, but my recommendation is clarify the assessment objectives rather, because you may approach the assessments very differently between what your ultimate outcome is. So I think it's more useful to clarify, okay, it's this and not that. And from there on, it's clearer in terms of what to do and how to proceed. So the contributions of this framework is that it provides practical guidance to assess and build resilience in each of these various domains and along those various organizational levels. It distinguishes between formative and summative assessments in the resilience context and provides the organizing logic to conceptualize and plan to build and assess various types of resilience required within a socio-technical system. It clarifies the multidimensionality of resilience and illustrate how contributions from various fields and disciplines needs to come together to build and assess resilience. If you go and look at the framework chapter, each one of these domains has a very different set of disciplines that are normally focusing on building that. No wonder resilience is such a multivariate construct. No wonder you need a very multidisciplinary team to look at it, and that so many disciplines and areas and institutions are increasingly interested in this. There are various ways of approaching this, but each one of those particular disciplines bring a particular contribution to the wider resilience landscape, as clarified by these domains of resilience. Then the third chapter makes a methodological and empirical contribution. And the aim is to use the resilience building principles suggested by Biggs in a formative resilience assessment to enhance the general social resilience within this essential service organization. I was looking for a participative process, and when I found appreciative inquiry as a facilitation process, I recognized that it matched each one of the requirements I had for a formative resilience assessment. It is a process that deliberately solicits participation and generates social innovation. What I like about it is that Holman, a systems change agent, described it as an approach that can be used to engage with emergence. Complexity, emergence, you're engaging directly with the emergence in an ambiguous way, but towards a particular outcome. And this is where the resilience building principle, so let me just first say, in terms of the appreciative inquiry, you start by defining the topic. And people in Eskom could identify why the resilience of our essential service is needed. Then we went in to discover the best of what is, and people told their own personal accounts of where they have seen resilience in action relative to our Eskom definition, which I will show you just now. Then, before we came to dream about vision, logic, and ideals of what might be, I introduced them to the 7 generic resilience building principles that has emerged from socio-ecological systems and that enhance the resilience of ecosystem services. And I showed them the similarity with, as much as this works here, let's apply its wisdom to our essential services produced by our socio-technical system, because the principles has been shown to be generically applicable across complex adaptive systems. Following that, we then design, through collaborative dialogue, based on consent of what should be, and then design the destiny of what will be, what's the next steps, how are we going to do that? So that's the appreciative inquiry process in a nutshell. When it comes to the resilience building principles, what you need to understand to be able to recognize my results is that the top 3 consist of what should be in the system. The middle one is how you think about the system. And the last 3 is about the governance of resilience in the system. Then in Eskom, what is also fascinating, let me tell you this, since I've graduated, I have had more workshops now on request than what I did for my research. When I was doing the research, I was making it happen. Now people are asking me, please, we want to have one of those workshops. So participants are enjoying it so much that this is developing a life of its own, which is also why this brochure is timely, because I think it should not just stop in Eskom. I think it has the potential to be very beneficial in multiple contexts. So within Eskom, we have defined the capabilities that we require to be resilient. When something happened, the silo was cracked, you need to respond rapidly and you need to recover. Knowing that it's tense, that it's tight, that we're operating on a knife's edge, you need the ability to operate under stress. Keep the lights on, even though it's tough. Ellen, I'm sure you can tell countless stories of the mood and the atmosphere in national control as the supply-demand deficit became closer and closer. Tough, okay? And many people did not cope. More and more, I don't think it's quite the same anymore, but eventually it was on a weekly, on a daily basis that ambulances from Sunninghill and from Waterfall came to pick up the people that collapsed just couldn't cope with the stress. Let me stop there. You need the ability to not just respond and operate under stress. You need to be able to anticipate, identify, and adapt prior to, proactively, in order to build in what is needed. And you need to retrospectively, based on reflection, deliberately evolve your levels of resilience through lessons learned, looking at opportunities, near misses, failures, and build the lessons of those incidents into your practices. So these 5 capabilities is what we pursue and what was used to assess formatively the resilience here. You need to understand that to see the data. When I asked the groups, do we have it or don't we? Just vote, okay? People said, absolutely, we operate under stress. That does not mean we operate well under stress. It means we do it. But we don't deliberately evolve, and we're not very good with anticipate and adapt. When it came to the individual votes, on where do you see opportunities for us to apply these principles, these 7 principles, relative to our Eskom resilience definition, the areas that the individuals voted for, we have to better anticipate and adapt. We have to better evolve. And we have to focus on governance. Clear pictures across. And then, if you remember the process, what we then did for each group, we selected the ones with the highest vote. People went into the tables and participated around design and delivery of those particular areas. And these areas spoke to new social realities, much more than anything else. So collectively, participants sought a transformed social reality to enhance essential service resilience. Contributions from this assessment. The process fostered a shared understanding of resilience across the system. Because I used waterfall in the beginning, everybody knew about resilience. They were involved in the resilience program. They knew the definition. As it went on, people had no idea. What is resilience? Do we do resilience? What is that? Yet, they could each tell their own personal stories. When you show them the resilience, they could tell you a story about it. And when they walked out, they knew why this matters, why it's important, and how to recognize it. The process gives voice to participants and mobilize them for collective action. The reason I have so many workshops this year is because from last year, people remember it and say, I want it. I want more of this. Please come do it for us. It gives voice and it mobilizes for action. What I really like about it is that it operationalized the resilience building principles themselves. If you look at those last 4, it actually applies them in practice. So you are building resilience in the process of conducting this formative assessment. And because it was designed as a short workshop intervention, it can be pushed into 3 hours comfortably, if I manage the conversation. That enables a rapid assessment process that can filter across the organization and be used in more areas to expose more people to this type of thinking. And it can be replicated in other contexts. As far as the SenseMaker methodology is concerned, the aim of this paper was to facilitate the use of SenseMaker in research by reducing the high barrier of entry due to the initial learning curve that's required in using it. And it synthesizes practical experience and available literature to guide research in their method selection, research design, and execution. The SenseMaker approach is absolutely based on complexity thinking. And when I look at all the various types of ways in which it is used, every one of these, I've extracted these 3 usage patterns, and I propose that all 3 of these usage patterns can be productively applied to resilience research. And that is monitoring, evaluation, and measuring impact of interventions, mapping of ideation cultures and mindsets and attitudes, and the detection of trends and weak signals. And the insights from this sense-making approach can then be used to nudge intractable contexts to more adjacent and beneficial futures, adjacent possibles. Please come sit in the shade. Okay, so when it comes to this method, we have, when you initiate the research, you've got to design a signification framework based on the ideas that the researcher is interested to explore within the narratives and the ideas of the community. That signification framework establishes like a conceptual space between these various ideas, very different from your traditional surveys, from your Likert scales. You ask people to tell you a story of a particular account of something that happened, something that has left, and they still remember it. Why? Because there's emotion attached to it. Something that actually happened. Briefly share that. Then show me this story of yours. Where does it fit into this space? If it was projects, what was most important in that incident that you've just told me about? The quality of the deliverables, the time frame by which when it had to be done, or the budget. Okay? For instance, that's an example. They are all right. There's no right or wrong. It is, what was it? What was the most significant contributing factor? And if you have a well-balanced project organization, you expect to have distributed narratives across all three those signifiers. If not, something is wrong. And that's the power of seeing the patterns distributed across the system. You then collect your narratives, which is a lot of work. Story work takes hard work. The participants signify their narratives themselves. So no analyst needs to interpret what was said or codify what was said, because it is a mixed method that uses the qualitative narratives and the quantitative data from where they've placed their dots on the signification framework, which is then the basis for sense making. The researcher go and extract patterns from those narratives, and the collective sense making that follows is when you go back to the community that has been researched, or the participants, you go and ask them, where do you think the pattern is? And you show them where the pattern really turned out to be. And either it confirms or, but then if you ask them why, they will tell you why. Why is this pattern like this? And that's when people dig deeper. And it's in that collaborative sense-making that the true rich conversations emerge from that community. When we applied this previously to safety in Eskom, the safety officers were so surprised, because the points that strongly came out of the research is stuff the safety officer said, this has never come out in our investigations, in our management walkabouts, in our conversations around safety. And you know, you may not know, but there is a tremendous effort put into safety in the system. Does it result in the emergence of safety across the system at the systems level? No, because it's a complex problem, just like resilience. So that's the sense making. And then in response to identifying and understanding and having a deep awareness of the patterns of the narratives across the system, this insight can then be used to stimulate adaptively. How can we have more of these positive stories emerge? How can we dampen the negative? And in that way, shape the evolution of that system and nudging it towards more desirable futures. And this then is the method that I used in the last resilience assessment chapter. So Chapter 5 makes a methodological and empirical contribution, and its aim was to use this narrative-based sense-making approach to assess the composition of social resilience resources, the specified versus the general, within an essential service organization in response to a specific disruption. One of the things that we do in response to the grid code requirements and the requirements of the Disaster Management Act is to conduct emergency exercises. People must do their own emergency exercises in response to test their business continuity plans, their emergency preparedness plans, but we then bring upon them provincial level and multi-province. We normally involve more and more provinces together, nudging people to cooperate across provincial boundaries, as well as national exercises. So the approach extracted systems level patterns from the narratives, signified participants, and we performed this one following a national exercise that simulated cascading failure leading into a national blackout. So it was a very complex, multidimensional simulation that all the different functions across the organization were confronted with things they did not thought was possible, and everybody had to respond in new ways, and they had to cooperate. Because the interesting thing about big disruption like that, it is your response to be appropriate necessitates that you integrate with functions you don't integrate with on a day-to-day basis. Because to do your job when it's business as usual, your box is clearly defined, your profile is defined, your processes are defined and documented. But when disruption comes, you've got to step out of that box and in business unusual, reach out and do things that you should know is there, but you don't normally work with it. And that is needed in effective response. Just to show, the indicators from the framework was used to inform the signifiers that was used in the signification framework. And a few days following the incident, we sent the link to the participants across the organization and invited them to share an observation of something that has stayed with them. We have just conducted another national exercise about a month ago, 3 weeks ago, a month ago, where we simulated a successful cyber attack that also caused havoc across the organization. We had all the people in one room. It was chaos, it was fun, and we have repeated the same thing based on the lessons learned from the signification framework. We've slightly modified it to just extract more interesting data. This work is ongoing work because the insight is so useful to us. So what the results has shown is that the organization is much more comfortable in using specified resilience resources than the general, even though the uncertainty of the scenario perhaps necessitated more general resilience responses. And some aspects of general resilience are evident, but weakly developed. We also used a construct of Antonovsky called sense of coherence to measure individual levels of sense of coherence. This is a measure of people's resilience in the face of stresses of daily life, and it also reflects quality sense making. The three different aspects that it consists of is cognitively, how do you make sense of what's going on? Doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong. What is your, what is your conviction that you see what's going on? Or I don't understand at all. I want to stick my head in the sand like an ostrich and hide from this because I can't make sense of it. So it's your perception about your cognitive sense making. Secondly, do you have the confidence that you can manage because you can lay your hands on the resources that you need to cope? Not I have it in my pocket, I know who to ask. Okay? I can manage because I know where to get it. And lastly, it matters. In my heart of hearts, I see the purpose. I see why It is necessary for me to go through the pain and pay the price and do what needs to be done, because I can see the purpose of my contribution in that space. Those are the three different constructs or aspects of sense of coherence. Now, what I did on this scatter diagram is to show you sense of coherence and levels of sense of coherence in the organization relative to the preparedness that people profess that they have put into the exercise prior to the event. The narratives in red are people that said, you know what, this thing left me scared. We can't do it. The narratives in blue, people say, I have hope that we will be able to pull it through and we can make a difference. You see the pattern? The box shows you the 25th and 75th percentiles of where the narrative fell. And what this results has shown is that participants with a high sense of coherence were better prepared for the scenario, were confident that they have permission to act, and that they understood the big picture, foresaw success in the outcome, and were optimistic about the future. So the implications from this narrative-based assessment is that organizations need to develop the flexibility and ambidexterity to enable the utilization of both those different types of resources. They are so different, specified and general. Both are required. Both are essential. But how do we develop that capacity to be able to exercise both? Because they seem to contradict. And to instill general social resilience competencies in the organizational context, in our organizational context, will require significant organizational level transformation of the ways in which management is enforced, the current organizational culture, and the metaphors required to nurture and fuel the emergence of adaptive responses. It conflicts with the soil is not fertile. There are so many rocks. There's too many weeds that this thing is going to happen by itself. And the results confirm the literature that SOC levels affect perception and event assessment and can be an incentive to action in the face of difficult assignments. And my conclusion from looking at the results is that SOC might be Eskom's strongest social resilience resource at present, at the time of this investigation. So the contributions from this narrative-based assessment is conceptually, this was the first known resilience assessment to quantify and distinguish the usage patterns between specified and general resilience at the systems level. The assessment method employed is reproducible, and the indicators can be adapted to suit the assessment objectives. The SenseMaker tool and method is suitable for social resilience assessments. And I hope that I have shown you how these respective scientific contributions has been met. And to conclude, the theoretical contribution focused on the framework with specific emphasis on the social resilience, general social resilience. The methodological contribution brought participants' views and their voices to the fore. And furthermore, the empirical contributions pointed to ways in which Eskom can enhance resilience within its socio-technical system. It has been fascinating for me to reflect on this learning journey, on what is the difference in the implication on how I and we approach resilience before and after I set out to grow and to learn, but I have still been amazed at the results of this research. It shifted the focus from me assuming resilience is about technical infrastructure to highlight that essential services are produced by complex adaptive socio-technical systems that requires this interplay of these two different types. To shift the focus from this relentless top-down push, these are the board-dictated deliverables and you have to do what you need to do, to the recognition for a need for bottom-up emergence through participation and the value the contribution social agents make. They can bring it or they can take away. Social agents can take away resilience from the system. And therefore, the need to be sensitive to systems-level patterns of behavior that is prevalent within the organization. To shift from resilience assessments as performance measures to track progress against targets, to recognize resilience is an emergent outcome from complex adaptive systems. And to shift from the perception that resilience can be produced through formalized programs of good practice, to recognize that resilience requires an ongoing commitment to adaptive management and formative resilience building processes. Like always, there's huge limitations to the study. My focus was Eskom, which means that it necessarily excluded all the metropolitans that provide their own power, which includes all the municipalities provide their own power, which includes all the metropolitans. They were excluded from the study. So even though it's vast in its impact, it excluded some key economic hubs. As it focused on a single utility in South Africa, because we are such a large role player, it would be very difficult or it would be more difficult to go and apply this investigation in another country and achieve that reach and that scope, because most other countries' utilities consist of multiple organizations working together. Ours is still a monopoly in multiple ways. The study focused on social resilience, and we did not explicitly consider hard infrastructure resilience or the interaction between hard and soft. And as it focused on the electric utility context in the name of essential services, the approach would need to be adapted to apply to other essential service contexts like water or education. There are multiple different essential services, medical. So there are so many themes that has emerged from this that really necessitates further investigation. And one of them is more approaches is needed to build essential service resilience in different contexts, especially to enable the much needed energy transitions. We know that whenever communities are protesting, it's very often this thing, service delivery. We know that service delivery is a big issue. But when you look globally with what is happening in energy and in electricity, much transformation is required. Specifically to build general social resilience, to increase the adaptability and transformability of the new energy futures, and to better understand this role of sense of coherence competencies to enhance collective sense-making and general social resilience. To explore the nature of the institutional transformation that's required to create that organizational context and culture where resilience can emerge. The dictatorial, autocratic, where's Nina, masculine governance approaches it's not conducive to this to grow. And we need to understand the difference between complicated and complex problems and its implications for building general and specific resilience. And I propose that a deeper exploration into the distinction between these may mitigate some of the confusion that currently exists in approaches for resilience that is cited in the literature. And how can we develop that ambidexterity to employ the appropriate mix of resilience resources depending on the context? It's one thing to drill into people through exercises and processes. This is the standard operating process that you must follow. But the best pilots know when to break the rules. How do you bring that across in such large vast essential service organizations that are so widespread, because that's the level of flexibility that we need. And to explore the social implications in terms of power and politics when it comes to building resilience, because any resilience building interventions empowers, and power has implications. More is needed to understand that in the different social contexts. And I reflected on this also from my own journey in the conclusion of my research. Surprising areas that came out when we had the National Industrial Action incidents taking place.
So what's interesting is when we needed to work with our mandate just to answer some of those questions, I mean, the first thing was a bit of a shocker because we looked at the formal requirements, like in terms of the Disaster Management Act, and there were these huge gaps. Literally, the Act was passed in 2002, and whilst Eskom's got a lot of processes for different emergencies and the like, it wasn't at all kind of matching some of the aspirations of the Act. And I say aspirations because a lot of organizations haven't really internalized what the Act requires. So to give you an example, I mean, we're preparing for, when I say preparing for, we're preparing readiness for a national blackout. And in South Africa, that looks very different to like Nigeria. Nigeria's got gas turbines. You literally just turn them on and you start the system again. A coal-fired station is like a factory. You need to start a factory before you can start a generator. So it's a completely different world that we live in. So what I'm trying to get to is we had these formal requirements and we really focused on those and delved into those. And kind of, I think, for a moment, lost the bigger picture of what resilience was. So coming back to having someone like Liza on the team, we started looking at some of these elements. Now we were suddenly in the throes of all of this. And, you know, Alan will know, he was right in the middle of, you know, the 2008, 2014, 15, the more recent load shedding, and it's hectic. Yes. So how do you then start building resilience when you're actually in the middle of it? How do you get your executives to go on a 5-day course on how to manage the big one that we haven't seen yet, which is a national blackout? And so one of the things, and Liza was talking about top-down versus bottom-up, that changed is we started looking at, so how can we make this thing happen more like, I love Dave Snowden's thing, the evolutionary potential of the present. So we had emergency structures, which we'd established a while back, but how do we implement this new way of doing things that would facilitate a really big disaster? So we knew we couldn't get the executives that amount of time. It just wasn't going to work, and some of them really weren't interested. They, as we know, had other agendas. So we started just working through it. Every little incident, we started introducing elements of this. So we literally started working from where we were. And it went really well, to the extent that we've just done this exercise now. None of them have been on formal training. But even in this exercise, we took them into the planning mode. And it was amazing because we took them into this quiet space and they suddenly understood how the bits fitted together. So what I'm really trying to illustrate is the way of thinking about how you implement a top-down sort of a waterfall project, if we use the term agile projects in this space. I mean, it's amazing to see the difference. It takes away the stress from the team. You know, it's interesting also just working with the diversity of the team. You suddenly notice how each member of the team are very different and how they each bring something. Now, even someone who really thinks that, you know, the complicated way of doing it is a really helpful person in the team, because they create a kind of a tension in the team that makes you say, how do we make this happen despite the fact we can't go top down? So yeah, accessing that. And then, I mean, where we are now, it's really interesting. We're going into a whole, we've reached the tipping point. We need to rebuild the organization. And it's really difficult because even as a management team, we haven't really been told what the full strategy is. And it's a difficult space to be in. But to be able to work in this way and really using the idea of sense of coherence, how do you make sense of where we are? And when I mean we, it's my team, or it's the people that we're working with, Alan and the guys in the organization. How do we just simply make sense of where we are? You know, we don't know what the end state is, but we know that we're heading in this direction. Then so that's the sense making, and then establishing a sense of meaning. How can we turn this into something that can be really productive? So, for example, we've got a little mantra going at the moment with Eskom unbundling. We want to be more agile for the transition. We want to be more integrated once we've unbundled, and we want to be a stronger community of practitioners. And so that's kind of taking us into a really interesting space, because they all sound counterintuitive. But when you throw these counterintuitive things in and you start working with sense of coherence, and you've got Liza walking around the organization doing these formative assessments, people going, oh, I get it. We've seen this, just a little thing. We're doing these little, to try and develop, I think it's part of the question, one of the earlier questions as well, around how do you get individuals. So one of the things we're doing is like TED Talks. We're calling it Red X. Redesign your world, and X being whatever it is, whether you're in cybersecurity, whether you're at national control, how do you redesign your thinking? And we started off, we thought, how many people could we get on stage? So we thought, Lisa managed to get about 7 people into a little team. Within a week, we had 40 people sign up for it. And part of the thing was they sat there and they said, why are we doing this? And when they realized, when Lisa spoke about the sense of coherence thing, and they suddenly realized, but I do have agency, because there's something I'm doing, even though it's small, whether I'm in the finance department, dealing with a team that we need to keep motivated through all of this. So we now got all of these cohorts running. We're struggling to, so on the 22nd of November, we're going to be running like a TED sort of thing, putting people on stage saying, let's demonstrate what the sense of coherence looks like when you put individuals in there. So just to come back to my earlier question, what's it like having someone in a team? And I think, Wensi, this is really interesting. What's interesting to me is that, this idea of co-evolutionary things happening in a complex system. What Lisa's brought through the project to our team and to the broader community that we're in is a real ability to look at it completely differently. In fact, people keep asking me, why are you still in Eskom? And this is genuine, my real answer is, it's a really fascinating place to be. Because Erica, in fact, once said to me, she really misses, the size of the toy. You've got Erica's words. She says you just don't realize the size of the toy you've got to play with, and it stuck with me, and it's genuinely like that. Now, here's a aspirational challenge, I think, Wensi, which is, if we could sow seeds in all of these critical sort of infrastructure areas by finding people not like Lisa, but with similar kind of thinking around, and working with you guys in a transdisciplinary way, maybe we could make quite a substantial difference to where the country is. So whether it's the transformation issues we've got, whether it's the financial state of the country and the state-owned entities, whatever it is, whether it's some of the gender issues. So I think sowing these kinds of seeds, we could both be generating, from an academic point of view, the thinking, but we could change organizations like that. So I just wanted to leave that with you, and thank you again for, hosting not just this, but the whole experience that Lisa's been on.